Pool cleaners were walking through the crime scene. Not investigators, not forensic technicians. Pool cleaners, vendors, people with no connection to the case, no training, no awareness of what they might be contaminating or destroying, wandering through the private residence where an 84-year-old woman had been taken from her home less than 24 hours earlier. That is not a rumor. That is not speculation from someone with an agenda. That is what happened after Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos released the crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. He released it early. He released it without explanation. And then he let the vendors in. I've been covering this case since day one, and I've gone back and forth on how to characterize what we've seen from this investigation. Whether the failures were procedural, systemic, or something worse. But when a retired lieutenant with 25 years at Nassau PD and one of the founding members of the NYPD K9 unit looks at how this investigation was handled and uses the word malfeasance, that's not me editorializing. That's a law enforcement expert with decades of experience looking at a specific set of decisions and calling them what he believes they are. Today we're going to go through those decisions one by one. We're going to look at what cadaver dogs actually are, what they can do, why they weren't deployed here, and what a retired law enforcement expert says that decision tells us about the person in charge of this investigation. And we're going to look at what that expert believes the cadaver dogs would find, and what finding it would mean for the Guthrie family. This is not a comfortable video, but it's one that needs to be made.
When a crime scene is released prematurely, you're not just losing evidence, you're losing the ability to ever prove what that evidence once was.
If you've been following this case from the beginning, and you want every development covered the day it happens, subscribe to the Obscure Report right now. There are more updates coming on Nancy Guthrie, and you don't want to piece it together after the fact. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. She was in her pajamas. She had no shoes. She didn't have her phone. Her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable journalists in American television. The reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery stands at over $1 million. The FBI confirmed early in the investigation that ransom letters received by a Tucson television station and by TMZ are genuine, originating from whoever actually took her. Both payment deadlines in those letters passed in February without any resolution. As of today, 67 days in, there is no publicly named suspect. There is no arrest. What there is, according to experts who have been watching this investigation, is a record of decisions that made finding Nancy harder than it needed to be. Let's start with the crime scene release. Because this is where Mike Gold, the retired Nassau lieutenant, says his alarm bells first went off. When law enforcement secures a crime scene, the principle is straightforward. You protect the scene until every piece of potentially relevant evidence has been identified, documented, and preserved. In a residential kidnapping case, that scene...
In behavioral analysis, we distinguish between an error of ignorance and an error of judgment. Ignorance means you didn't know better.
...is the home, the last place the victim was known to be. The location where physical evidence, trace materials, fingerprints, fibers, biological material, scent trails, is at its highest concentration and its most fragile. Every hour that passes, evidence degrades. Every person who walks through, even with the best intentions, risks contaminating what remains. Sheriff Nanos released Nancy Guthrie's home as a crime scene early in the investigation. His stated reason was that it was a private residence, not a commercial property with ongoing traffic. Gold's reaction to that reasoning was direct. It makes the decision worse, not better. A private residence with a single occupant has less ambient contamination than a commercial property. Releasing it early accomplishes the opposite of what you want. And then came the vendors, the pool cleaners, people whose job it was to maintain the property, going about their routine, walking through the exact space where investigators needed the cleanest possible environment. Gold called it a neon light, a signal visible from a distance. Why is this person making this decision? It's worth pausing on that question because there's more than one possible answer and each answer has different implications. The charitable interpretation is pure incompetency. A sheriff who lacked the experience and knowledge to understand what releasing a crime scene early would cost the investigation. who didn't know what he didn't know and made a bad call without understanding its consequences. Gold acknowledges incompetency as one possibility. He used
A leader who attacks the people asking questions has already told you something important about their relationship with accountability.
the word directly, but the word he reached for when he was being less charitable was malfeasance, not negligence. Malfeasance, the willful doing of an act that is wrong or harmful. That's a significant distinction. Incompetency means the sheriff didn't understand what he was doing. Malfeasance means he did. Gold doesn't claim to know which it is, but he does say that when you add up the full pattern of decisions, the crime scene release, the refusal to deploy cadaver dogs, the public criticism of journalists and community members asking questions, the answers that are themselves questions, the sheriff telling the press, "Your guess is as good as mine," in response to direct questions about evidence, the cumulative picture is not the picture of a competent, well-led investigation. And if you've been following the broader investigation into Sheriff Nanos, you know there's additional context here. The Pima County supervisors have been moving to compel sworn reports from Nanos amid fraud allegations. There's a perjury accusation related to comments he made in a deposition. His disciplinary history has been scrutinized. The decision to send physical evidence, the gloves found near Nancy's home, to a private lab in Florida, rather than to the FBI's National Crime Lab at Quantico, has been reported as obstruction by some outlets. Nanos disputes that characterization. But the pattern of friction between the sheriff's office and federal investigators has been documented across multiple outlets and is not in serious dispute. That's the context in which Mike Gold's criticisms land. This isn't a retired cop taking shots at a colleague. This is an expert in a specific investigative tool, one of the founding members of the NYPD K9 unit, looking at a specific, inexplicable decision and saying, in plain language, that it defies professional logic. Subscribe to the Obscure Report and hit the notification bell, because the next development in this investigation, whatever it is, gets covered here first. Now let's talk about the dogs, because I think most people, including most true crime viewers, have a general sense of
The resistance to cadaver dogs in investigations like this often comes from a specific cognitive bias, the belief that because you can't see something,
what a cadaver dog does, but not a precise understanding of what it actually is and what it's capable of. And that precision matters for understanding why Gold's reaction to their absence in this case is so strong. Cadaver dogs, more precisely called human remains detection dogs, are trained to identify the specific scent compounds released by decomposing human tissue. These compounds are complex and varied. Different stages of decomposition produce different chemical signatures and different environmental conditions. Temperature, humidity, soil composition, water affect how those signatures move and disperse. A well-trained cadaver dog can detect trace quantities of these compounds in concentrations too small to register with any instrument yet developed by humans. Courts in the United States have formally recognized them as scientific instruments. Not metaphorically, formally. They are used to establish probable cause for warrantless searches, one of the very few investigative tools that can do so, precisely because the legal system has accepted that their detection capability is reliable and reproducible. Gold described their ability as almost magical to anyone who has seen them work in the field. That's not hyperbole from a dog enthusiast. That's a law enforcement professional who has watched animals locate remains that human searchers on foot could not find, remains in water, remains buried under years of accumulated organic material, remains in environments where every visible search method had already been exhausted. They see the world through their nose, he said. Invisible molecules. That's what they're tracking, not what humans can observe. What physics and
What people don't always appreciate about the legal recognition of these animals is what it implies about reliability.
chemistry leave behind, at concentrations so small they're effectively invisible to everything except a trained animal. And they come for free. That's the detail that I kept coming back to in Gold's analysis. He noted explicitly that volunteer search and rescue dog organizations exist all over the country. These are trained animals and trained handlers who do this because they believe in it, who show up at no cost to the investigating agency, who are ready to deploy on request. You don't need budget approval. You don't need a departmental procurement process. You call, they come. Nanos reportedly said the dogs were being put on hold for now. Gold's response to that phrase is worth sitting with. He said it makes no sense. He said it defies logic. He said the only instrument that can currently detect what needs to be detected in this case is being set aside by the person with primary jurisdiction over the investigation, for reasons that haven't been publicly explained. There's an uncomfortable question buried in Gold's analysis that he came close to but didn't quite state directly, so I'm going to state it. If you are an investigator who genuinely wants to find Nancy Guthrie, dead or alive, but genuinely wants to find her, and someone offers you a free, court-recognized scientific instrument that specializes in locating human remains in exactly the kind of environment where this case's evidence points, what is the explanation for not using it? Gold offers incompetency. He offers ego. A sheriff who wants to be seen leading the investigation personally, rather than delegating to tools and people who might outperform him. He offers the possibility of something worse. What he doesn't offer, because the public record doesn't support it, is a legitimate investigative reason for the decision. Because there isn't one. Here is what Gold believes about Nancy Guthrie's current status, and this is the part of this conversation that I want to handle carefully because it involves a real family that is living through this.
From a psychological standpoint, the shift from rescue to recovery is one of the most difficult transitions a family goes through.
Gold said directly that he believes Nancy Guthrie is deceased. He made that assessment early in the investigation based on her age and her medical condition. He is not alone in that assessment. Investigators in the case, family members themselves, and multiple experts who have commented publicly have arrived at similar conclusions, with varying degrees of certainty and varying degrees of willingness to say it out loud. Gold is not hedging. He said it plainly. This is a recovery, not a rescue. And here is what he believes cadaver dogs could do right now, today, 67 days after the abduction, even with the crime scene long since released. Even with the trail cold by conventional search standards. The dogs don't care how long it's been, that's the critical point. Human remains produce detectable compounds for years. Gold mentioned that he's preparing to search for a woman who has been missing since September 11th, 2001, 25 years, using cadaver dogs in combination with new DNA evidence and investigative tools. The degradation of time does not eliminate the scent signatures these dogs are trained to find. It changes them. The dogs are trained to find them anyway. Gold said he believes Nancy's remains, if the historical data on cases like this holds, would be within approximately 5 miles of the crime scene. A grid search of that area with properly trained cadaver dogs is not a fantasy. It's a standard investigative methodology. It's what those dogs and those handlers train to do. And finding her remains means finding the location. Finding the location means processing it for additional evidence. Biological material, ligatures, anything left behind. Evidence that could, in Gold's words, be instrumental in building the case against whoever took her. There are two things happening simultaneously in this investigation that I want to hold together for a moment because I think they illuminate each other. On one side, you have the digital and forensic work, the DNA running in 2 labs, the Bitcoin wallet sitting untraceable, the ransom letters confirmed as genuine by the FBI, the informant communications to TMZ that investigators spent hours trying to trace and couldn't. High-technology investigative...
There's something worth naming here about the psychology of complexity. High-technology investigations, DNA, Bitcoin tracing, cell tower data dation, they feel sophisticated.
Tools. Complex. Slow. Expensive. Requiring specialized expertise and significant resources. On the other side, you have a low-technology tool that costs nothing, that volunteer organizations maintain out of dedication, that courts have already recognized as scientifically valid, that Gold says should have been deployed from day one and could still be deployed today. Cadaver dogs. Human remains detection. Trained animals working grid patterns in the desert terrain surrounding the Catalina foothills. The high-technology work is ongoing. The low-technology work hasn't happened. And according to a founding member of one of the most respected K9 programs in American law enforcement, that absence is not explainable by any standard of professional investigative practice. Where does this leave the investigation? And where does it leave the Guthrie family? Gold didn't pull his punches about what he thinks comes next. The family, he said, has likely come to terms with the probability of Nancy's death. The focus in his analysis
When a behavioral analyst hears the word malfeasance used by a credentialed law enforcement professional in a case that's still active, that's not noise.
has shifted to recovery, to finding her, to giving her family something to hold on to recovering whatever physical evidence might still be present at the location where her remains are, to building the case that eventually leads to an arrest and a prosecution. That case cannot be built without the evidence. The evidence won't be found by human eyes alone walking through the desert. The dogs can find what human eyes can't. They've been available all along. Here is the question I want to put to you directly, because I want to hear your thinking on this in the comments. Mike Gold used the word malfeasance, not negligence, not incompetency, though he used that word too. Malfeasance, the willful doing of something wrong. He said if he really wanted to go further, that's where he'd go. Given everything we've covered in this series, the crime scene released early, the vendors walking through it, the gloves sent to a private lab instead of Quantico, the friction with the FBI, the fraud allegations from the county supervisors, the perjury accusation, the dogs that were never called. Do you think what happened here is incompetency, political ego, or something else? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone on this case, and this particular question is one I genuinely don't have a settled answer to. Subscribe to the Obscure Report. This case is not over, the investigation is not over, and this channel is not going anywhere on it. Every development gets covered here first, and there are more coming. 67 days, no arrest, no named suspect, no cadaver dogs, and a retired law enforcement expert who looked at all of it and reached for the word malfeasance. Nancy Guthrie deserves better than this investigation has given her.